I request all the panelists to join us on the dais here. Sit next to me. To Aaron. Great. Very good morning, everyone. The topic that we have at hand today is data. That is something which has come up very strongly in this COP. We talk about risk informed decision making, we talk about sustainable land management, but no matter what we do, data is a basic denominator for everything we move forward towards. So, to speak to this topic, we will have a very illustrious panel that will speak and approach data from different angles. With me, I have Ms. Zita Sibiswari, who's the Deputy Director of UN University EHS in Bonn. I also have Mr. Salem Darwish, Advisor to the Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture in Lebanon. I have Dr. Moto Masubelere, scientist in the South African National Parks. Thank you for coming. And of course, host Baron, Dr. Baron Joseph, or Chief Scientist at UNCCD. We may also be joined by Mr. Ahmed Al Niami, the Manager for Technical Support in National Center for Vegetative Cover, who is on his way. We will start the session with a very brief presentation on tracking system for hazardous events and disaster losses and damages. And that will just set the stage for one of the applications of how data is being collected in the format and so on. And then I'll leave it to the panelists thereafter to bring their respective perspectives. So shall we have the presentation? So while we start the presentation, the importance of the, as I already mentioned, data has come up also very strongly in the other COPs. We have been there in Cali, we have been there in Baku, in the context of adaptation, in the context of loss and damage, in the context of biodiversity loss measurement. We have always felt the need for better and more data. And what we have been doing is to ensure that we can collect all this data, but more approaching it from an application point of view. My name is Animesh Kumar. I am the head of the UNDRR office in Bonn and hence the Global Code Portfolio Manager for Climate Change, Data, and Monitoring and Evaluation of Early Warnings for All. So we'll start this very short presentation just to set a stage. All of us and many of us are aware of a 30-year-old system that UNDRR together with some partners had put together in 1994. It's called DesInventar. DesInventar, basically the Spanish term, means inventory of disaster records. This has been done in more than 113 countries so far, officially data being collected by the governments at the subnational and local levels, in most cases, 3 administrative tiers below the national level. This data has provided a very comprehensive picture of losses and damages, of hazardous events, and more recently, in the context of the SFM reporting, the Sendai Framework Monitor, as well as SDG reporting, this database has come up as a very strong tool. But as I mentioned, this database is 30 years old. And as we are moving forward towards the 2030, we also realize that the use cases, the application and the demand for data is also increasing. For example, we have better demand, more demand for data in the context of climate change, specifically in the context of adaptation and loss and damage. Countries are needing more data to be able to quantify their losses and damages, including in the context of slow onset events, non economic losses, and so on. We also have the requirement for assessing their losses and damages from the financing point of view. So we have the fund for responding to loss and damage. UNDRR is also the host for Santiago Network on loss and damage. All of this requires one to have better access to data to be able to quantify their losses. If we can't quantify our losses, we can't turn into a dollar value, basically. Now we also have better demand in terms of intersectionality. Data, when aggregated, only tells half the story. When we disaggregate it, then we start understanding what the nuances of it is, and that's where we start moving towards better decision-making processes. We also aware about better recovery processes. If we don't have the right data, we can't ensure resilient recovery, and at the end, we can't better report SDG 1, 11, and 13. The source of the information is from this database. And UNDRR is the custodian of these three SDGs with selected targets and indicators. We don't have enough data as of now, and that has come out very strongly in an evaluation we have recently conducted. So what we are doing for the last couple of years is to develop a new database. We still don't have a name for it. For the purpose of referring to it, we call it the disaster tracking system for hazardous events and losses and damages, DTS to be short. It's four components. The first component focusing on data standards and methods. Second component is the ICT software side. The third is about capacity building and rollout to countries. And fourth is in terms of the partnerships. So, the first part I think is the most important for us because this is a substantive element. We have good methods. We have just compiled a set of indicators on hazardous events, losses, and damages. It's a 600 indicators that we have compiled so far. Each of them has a methodology behind and so on, but we still feel it's not enough. And that's where we need better data, better methods for adaptation and loss and damage, including slow onset events like land degradation, to be able to better look at the whole picture of risk. Where it becomes even more interesting is the calculation of hazardous events. So WMO, which is our core partner, has developed a methodology called cataloging of hazardous events. They will look into the hazard as a phenomena. UNDRR will look into hazard in terms of its impact. And the system will combine these two, and that's where the software part comes into the picture, wherein we look into how the software, the IT component, will bring the two parts together. One looking at the hazards, more in terms of continuous monitoring, and the second looking at the impact of disasters. When we talk about hazards, what is very important is that we realize it about the data limitations and methodological gaps in terms of slow onset events and non-economic losses. We have organized last year, we have UNU here, a good collaboration on slow onset events last year. This year, just a couple of months back, we organized another workshop on non-economic losses, and we have other events as well, including tomorrow on looking at nature as a connector of resilience. So these are some of the investments we are making into filling up the methodological gaps, where it's very clear that we have a long way to go. Starting next year, starting quarter one, we will start rolling out the system. And we understand that every country will be at a different level of maturity. So we'll start with measuring the data and digital maturity of countries and put the country on a specific spot. And then three options will be offered. Option one, country is at low level of maturity, so we'll offer them the full software, they can adopt it with full capacity of methods, data collection, and everything. The second option, country is at a middle level of maturity. They might want to change the system, adapt it further. They can do it. We'll offer them technical assistance. And the third option is that they want to develop it fully indigenously. They can develop a full system, but they need to follow the same data standards. Otherwise, we can't ensure data comparability across time and space. And that's where SDG monitoring and others also becomes very important. So that's our rollout plan. We can't do it alone. We are a very small organization, so UNDP and WMO are our core partners. I already mentioned about UNU as a core partner in our workshops, but also looking for more partnerships. We have developed other partnerships and collaborations, including one recently on landslides. We were discussing with UNEP and FAO on slow onset events, on non-economic losses with UNESCO, and also thematic issues like displacement. We have the platform on disaster displacement looking into climate mobility and so on. And we are also looking forward towards the IDRO, which is our neighboring pavilion, as well as a potential collaboration opportunity with UNCCD. And that's something which Baron as well, you may touch upon as well later. So with that, and I wanted to show a glimpse of some of you present in these group pictures of the workshops we have been organizing in Bonn. Every year, Bonn Technical Forum picks up one topic. We deep dive into different discussions on data. So that's the QR code for the tracking system, and we can go back to the banner of the session. So, with that backdrop, basically the point being made here is that we need better data for risk-informed decisions and so on. I'll move to Zita, and Zita, who are leading this whole work on interconnected risks, and more recently the discussion on the tipping points and so on. So, it will be good to hear from you when discussing how surpassing certain thresholds can significantly amplify disaster risk. Could you share a bit more in context of your report on the interconnected risk and in particular, the tipping points? How do you see this, and how it is important some data in it? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anivesh. And before I start, I would like to pay tribute to the really great work UNDR is doing in terms of collecting, organizing all the data. It's an incredible rich source of information. So you really should visit DesInventar and look at and look forward to the new database too. So we are researcher. We are always looking at the gaps, and this is how what I will talk about. It is an area where not so many data exist, and where we do have huge gaps. So UNUH is looking into interconnected disaster risk. Those are the risks which cascade globally, which like a domino effect cause new risk and amplify risks. And our last report looked into so-called risk tipping points. We understand risk tipping points as points of times where basically the risk landscape changes dramatically. So risk as you knew it before and the risk as you managed it before doesn't work anymore. And in our report, we bring 6 examples how that might happen in different areas of social ecological system. This is how we call it, where, so to say, ecosystems interact with our society. I would like to talk about one particular example, which is about groundwater and groundwater use. The groundwater stored in aquifers is oftentimes used in times of drought to mitigate drought risk. Actually, around 70% of the groundwater used is used in the context of agricultural irrigation, but it also supports around 2 billion people for drinking water supply. So this is a resource which is used in a specific context, especially if there's a drought situation. We are using our groundwater resources in a very unsustainable way. We do not even know, in many cases, how much groundwater we still have. It sounds quite surprising, but if you actually try to get solid data on groundwater availabilities for certain aquifers, you will find that the data is quite patchy, not solid, and the predictions how long certain groundwater resources might be sustainably available is not there. So a huge data gap actually. And that data gap means that we are not in a position to manage the groundwater resources in a way we should. But it's not only a data gap, it's also a mindset problem because groundwater is an invisible resource. So we are not so much aware if groundwater is depleting. Groundwater aquifers crossing boundaries, oftentimes crossing boundaries, borders, and oftentimes the management is again patchy. So if on one side of the border groundwater is extracted and on the other side it leads to water scarcity, this cross-border management is again an issue. So what we looked into is how often this is actually happening, and we see that in around 50% of the worldwide largest aquifers, the use is unsustainable. And to reverse this, it needs a lot of investment. You need to come up with groundwater management plans. You need to monitor your groundwater use. You need to restrict your groundwater use, and you need to prioritize certain type of uses you would like as a society to give priority to. And again, this is an issue which cascades across continents because in case one country doesn't have groundwater anymore, this has impacts in terms of food security, water security, and how, so to say, that groundwater-based resources can be replaced. I would stop here, but to reconnect with the data issue, so to say, it's important to see that it's not enough to change the mindset, so how we see these resources, but it needs to be connected to a sustainable management plan and respective monitoring plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zita. I think the idea in terms of having groundwater as one example because it has so much of interconnected nodes, both in terms of the rural areas as well as the urban areas. We have seen in many parts of the world where, because of unsustainable groundwater usage, we are seeing urban droughts. We are seeing food security really being endangered in many parts of the country. And actually, I have seen that with my own eyes in the basket of the Northwest India, for example, where environmental degradation, the root cause of environmental degradation and salinization in many parts of the agriculture rich parts of the world is because of groundwater depletion. And also the data aspect of it. If we don't monitor the data in terms of groundwater extraction, we will not be able to sustain it. So thanks for bringing that point. So from here we move to Baron, who is the chief scientist in the UNCCD. So, Baron, Zita already pointed out to one example of degradation in the context of water, the groundwater extraction. You're also speaking as representing UNCCD as the host of this COP and a co-organizer. So, and we have seen in many sessions since I've arrived, data really coming up as a big topic for discussion. So, as a chief scientist, could you give us more insights on the science-based monitoring to better address land degradation, desertification, droughts, and so on, and other topics apart from what Zita has already mentioned? Thanks.
So first, oh, okay, here we go.
To be
No,
perhaps closer to you.
all the way there. Okay, I'm going to eat it.
You have to.
Okay, with this ice cream, I will say that I'm in a unique position here because most of my attention is tied right now to negotiations. And tonight, actually, starting at 6 p.m. and lasting until tomorrow, probably, they will be negotiating basically the future direction for monitoring and national reporting under the UNCCD. Not at the level of detail that you just shared. That will be part of it for today to 2030, the current strategic framework. But there will be a new strategic framework in 2030, and they will set in motion a mechanism for establishing, I hope, that monitoring process. So let me just touch on that in the UNCCD context, which is probably very relevant to what the last two speakers described. Land is highly varied, right, and land degradation as well, including the drivers. In very short distances, what drives the degradation and what composes the processes that are relevant in that ecosystem is entirely different. So to have a monitoring approach, a long time ago, the convention, as we say, the parties in their wisdom recognized that it would not be possible to use a comprehensive approach at the national to global level. So what do I mean by that? If degradation varies so widely, no indicator is relevant everywhere, and only a few are possibly relevant in most places. So the convention embraced what today we would call an essential variables approach at that level, national to global, so that the indicators were truly indicative. They weren't meant to be designed to drive your national to local action, but to tell the story for the whole country. And that approach, going from no indicators to tier one in the SDG process, with the help of the Group on Earth Observations platform, right? So we're talking about countries as well as Earth observation organizations working together. We've been able to move that entire agenda forward. The convention then approaches this and says, from national to local, it's wide open. So, for example, if indeed groundwater is the deciding factor, what is driving or relevant to land degradation, it won't show up in the national to global data, but at the national to local level, it will drive the decision making, if that makes any sense, which puts us in a very good position to be interoperable, to cross over, because most of the examples that you two shared were clearly at the national to local level. So that, I think, offers us a great opportunity. And then I would add to that that by leveraging geo, we that whole concept of standards, we're not in the business of establishing standards, but the organizations that are, for the data sets that we're concerned about, are players in geo there, and that includes bodies that are particularly focused on this, like COS, like I forget OCG, I forget the acronym, but there's several that work in that area, and all have climbed on board the success of having almost all countries, except for developed countries, I want to say, report on these indicators. They're now engaging. So that way we can move in that direction. And so to finish this, I think that one lesson learned is that there must be a mechanism to play. There must be a way that these organizations can engage and know that their data are relevant. In our case, if we establish minimum data quality standards, then NASA and ESA and Japan Space Agency and CBOS, and I can go on, can all play. They're not competing anymore because the value add, it doesn't become apples to apples. We are not asking for that. It becomes green apples to red apples. But from a country's perspective, that's necessary. Last point, we work with Conservation International to develop software to put control of those decisions in determining what data sets are best for the country in the hands of the country. That really opens this up because the relevance begins to go up. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Baron. I think all the panelists are doing very well so far in terms of keeping to the time. Um, and I know, Baron, you're very busy with all the negotiations and you have to also head off towards another meeting event. So maybe I'll pose one question to you right away because when you're speaking something cropped in my mind into one terms of very interesting point you made in the context of SDGs as well, that there is SDGs are meant to be global, and national governments report at the global level, and then that's combined. In the context of land degradation, it often makes sense to do global monitoring, but the data often has to come from the local level. So, how do you ensure that from the local to national and the national to global, we have a coherent system of reporting, especially in the context of land degradation, which might have cross-boundary issues and so on? So that's one thing which triggered, and the second thing was scalability, the scale of like how many countries are reporting, how many countries have good data. Often when we go, the more we downscale, the better data we have, but then we can't scale it up to the national and the global level, and hence we can never have the full picture. You want to take it up now, or if you are still sitting, please frame up your discussion answers and come back later. Please go ahead.
So I'll just jump in now to say that if you know a little bit of the history of monitoring land degradation, you will know that those of us in this space taught the world how risky it is to scale up local data if you're not really paying attention to what influences that scale up. So you may recall there was a study done for land degradation in FAO, and it scaled up more erosion than the Earth could possibly provide, right? Because we were scaling up all of this local information. This is way before anybody ever thought about these challenges. So it's an understandable. Today we would be aware. There was no awareness at that time, but the lesson was well learned, and the convention therefore made this distinct. But relevance is everything. So even though countries understand it's indicative, they want these data sets to be relevant. And the mechanism that we're employing, also under the Geo LDN umbrella, but leveraging WOCOT, which is the largest global database for the practices that you would implement on the ground, the idea is to actually pursue that selection process I mentioned in the software in a participatory way, a guided way, but with all the relevant, knowledgeable people. So not just the GIS expert doing it without knowing what was going on the ground, but in a collaborative way. it's more expensive, but far, far more effective, and that ownership goes up. So when I say that 126 countries reported, and I'm showing off, the truth is some of them made it clear we had to use default data because we didn't have the capacity to do what I just said, and we don't yet. So it's still that tension, but we're moving in the right direction. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Baron. I think precisely that was the point I wanted to arrive at. It's the context I think is very important. So now let's move the discussion from the UN Bonn campus, because all the three people who have spoken so far are in the same building, in the same city, in the same campus of Bonn. Move to the countries, and we really want to hear from the governments now. So let me start with Dr. Moto Masubelete. He is the scientist in the South African National Park Association, National Parks, right? And the key point we want to hear from South Africa is in terms of the challenges and opportunities that you're facing, and you see moving forward in integrating data, in particular, into decision making in your work.
Thank you, moderator. It's a privilege for me to be among this esteemed panel from the UN. And yeah, from the South African perspective, the National Disaster Management Center is really key in terms of how we deal with disasters in the country. And as a scientist, data is very important. And the big challenges are around where data comes from different institutions. And, when you try to integrate some of these data, it might be applicable at the local level, but at a national, it becomes very tricky. So some of the institutions that are involved in the country, including SEON, they play a key role in basically collating all of the data that from the global level, and then downscaling all of that, as well as our meteorological South African Weather Service, especially. So they play a key role in actually using all of this data and then integrating it into the National Disaster Management Act. And we've realized that around 2016, that it is important to have a monitoring and evaluation framework as a country that helps in coordinating all of these different data sets that comes from all these different institutions. And that data is hosted by SEON, and SEON use all of that and translate it for, working with the National Disaster Management Center to give you on real time data on where all of these disasters are happening within the country. So some of the big challenges we've seen is around basically integrating all of these data sets to inform policy. If I speak from a national parks point of view, um, we want to move to a point where all of these different data sets from the Green Book, from the South African Risk and Vulnerability Atlas, all of that is incorporated into our climate change preparedness strategy. And that helps inform all of these different policies. And as we move with time, where we want to see a lot more personalization for the different stakeholders and clientele that we work with, and I would hope that I see that happening within our all of these different agencies. And then the Agricultural Research Council is responsible for the agricultural sector, all the different data sets in terms of onset data, um, long-term data set for warning farmers and local people. All of that sits within the Agricultural Research Council, and they have an early warning system called Umlindi that gives the adaptation actions that people need to put in place, as well, and all of that helps the country coordinate some of these disasters from national to local level. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Momoto. And thanks for bringing South African experience as well. We work very closely with the NDMC and have very good experiences that South Africa can bring in. In fact, South Africa was part of the first ever peer review done in Africa. That was 2016, when South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi came together to do a peer review. And we followed the OECD methodology of peer review, and that was really very successful. I was part of that team, and hence I very fondly recall the discussions we had then in terms of the data as well. So from there, South Africa, we moved to Lebanon, and we have Dr. Salem Darwish, advisor to the minister in the Ministry of Agriculture. And Dr. Salem, I would urge you to also share your insights, moving data from data to policy. How do you do that? What can you share in terms of your national experience in monitoring and preparing, in particular context of slow onset events and extreme events as well?
Thank you. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you for the invitation first. I think that what we are discussing today is very important, and we recognize lately in Lebanon these last 2 years. In Lebanon, I think, Joseph, I will join Joseph in 2 points. We submit our report on desertification, and because I prepared it, and we have a lot of missing data. So you cannot develop your agriculture system. You cannot have a warning early system regarding drought, desertification without data. So we recognize that is very important. Since March 2022, I want to mention that our last agriculture census in Lebanon date from 2010. And normally it should be done each 10 years. In this agricultural census, the result, we have 170,000 farmers. And we have farmers from different regions. As you know, Lebanon is a small country, so we have a various of climate area, microclimate area and we have a lot of crops, diversification of crops from fruit trees, the vegetables, etc., etc. So we recognize that we don't have any data. When we have, for example, an international organization asking us, what are your needs regarding for your, what is your strategy? So Minister of Agriculture start strategy in 2010, 14, then 15, 19, then 20, 25, but we do it as we can. We develop our national strategy for agriculture, but what was missing is the data. So the last one now we are achieving now, we place some indicators that, for example, we can see how much we fill from this indicator in percentage, but it's not sufficient. So that's why in March of 2022, we launched the farmer registry with FAO. And this farm registry, I come from also what Joseph is very important, because we have data from land. We make a production campaign once per year for randomly farmers in different areas. And we have this data. But when we have, for example, natural disaster, inundation or drought or whatever, but we cannot estimate the damage caused. So because we don't have data, we say estimation, it's around, we cannot continue like that. So we start the farmer registry, and this farmer registry, we join satellite data, satellite image with farmers. When farmers come to the ministry or centers of ministry, we ask him where are their field location, what type of crops, and if the land is owned by himself or it's rented or whatever. So in this case, when we need to develop a new strategy, For example, we need to focus on, for example, crops. They are with adaptation, yani highly adapted with climate change or whatever. So maybe we can ask farmers from this area, and we get the layer of, for example, olive trees, and we say, for example, you can grow olive trees in this area, and then so on. So we started. We have achieved 50,000 farmers, and our target is by June 2025 to arrive to 100,000 farmers. Why it's important? I give you an example. Right now, we have a conflict, political conflict in Lebanon, and we need to make an assessment for damage in south of Lebanon. So we took the farmers' registers, and we have all the data. We have the satellite image for their lands, and we identify, let's say, with 5% accuracy, and 95% sure accuracy, the damage caused by this area. So the data is very important. And also, I was responsible to prepare the national drought plan for Lebanon, and I will present it tomorrow at the League Arab. It was funded by UNCCD also, and we think we don't have any data. So now we put in place different criteria, different indicators, how we are going to involve stakeholders to be aware what are type of water management, how we gonna maximize or use water efficiency for farmers in terms of monitoring them to go to some crops with high added value and not asking too much for water. For example, some vegetables. We import a lot of vegetables. So I think the data is very important nowadays. We have a success story in Lebanon, and we are moving forward for different items. As you know, just to finish, we have a lot of decrease of rainfall or precipitation in Lebanon. And the first user of water is the agriculture sector, as mentioned by our colleague. So we need to if you want to make this balance between water use for households and water use for agriculture. And I think data is very important. We are moving forward now with our new national agriculture strategy that will to be 2030. So we are putting in place accurate data that will help us at every time to see how much we are increasing, for example, productivity, agricultural production, how's the quantity of water used by this sector, and how we can manage it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you made some very interesting points. And it was fascinating to hear how you brought together the information on impact on agriculture, which continues to be the most vulnerable sector on the one side, but also the socioeconomic side of it with the farmer registry. I think, Zita, you wanted to make a point on that?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to make a point because we always call for more data, and this is very important. But we also need to deal with the situation when there's no or not yet enough data. And I just wanted to make the point that we need to live oftentimes with this uncertainty, and we need to manage that uncertainty in a precautionary way, so that if we actually don't know exactly, for example, how much water we still have in the aquifer, that we deal with that aquifer in a way which allows preserving water for future generation, which allows still thinking about water sharing principles. So I just wanted to make the point that we call for data, we want data, but as long as we do not have enough, we should live with that uncertainty and manage it for future generations, so to say.
Thanks, Zita. Living with risk and uncertainty, I think, has been a challenge with all the risk managers. Long back, somebody had said that we cannot manage what we cannot measure. And that was almost 15 years ago. And I get a sense that we have mastered the art of managing without measuring, just in absence of data, which is very dangerous in the current world of complexity, the growing complexity of risk, and so on. The other challenge I often see that everyone wants to use data, but nobody wants to invest in it. Data does not generate by itself. If we don't invest into data, we will not be able to use it and make our own decisions informed. And that has been a challenge that we often face. But with that challenge, let me also open the floor for discussions from the audience. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any question or an intervention, and introduce yourself. And please let us know which panelist would you want to.
So my apologies, but I have to run to another event.
Your lasting key message, data to policy.
Well, I really loved the link that you both have made in different ways to the ground and on the farmer side and also on what's really happening. And I think that we need to work on that. And with respect to paying for it, we need to remember that our SDG 15, Life on Land, is the least invested in SDG, and yet it has very, very high returns. Why is it least invested in? Because the data aren't there. So clearly, somebody is going to take advantage of this. Maybe we need to come up. Geo, for example, has this private sector partnership. Maybe we need to leverage something like that to open those doors. Thank you.
Thanks, Baron. And good luck with the rest of the COP. So the floor is open for your interventions, questions, any insight that you would want to bring into the discussion. Anyone? If not, I do have Dr. Moko. You want to speak something? Please put.
Yeah, I can add
Yeah, please.
in terms of the use of data for resilience and future thinking that I've seen happening a lot in the South African context. If you look at all of the, like, take day zero for example in Cape Town, played a critical role in how the people in Cape Town got engaged and were constantly consulted on issues around water, in terms of water usage, in terms of how much water they can use per day. And so when I look at the national strategies and sector strategies, scenario-based planning um, has been implemented quite tremendously, and I think it's helping us in terms of assessing impacts while looking at the future, especially in climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction.
Thanks, Dr. Moto. So let me pose a question to the panelists. What is in terms of the insights that we have gained so far in this discussion? How do you see the evolution? How do you see the data itself evolving in the way we are with the ecosystem itself changing as the to bridge the gap between analysis and implementation? It's like, how do you see? I mean, can you bring some more insights? I'm trying to push you forward. Like, you have data. How is it evolving? What do you need to make it much better to inform your decision making? And how do you see this better turning into policies and so on? Maybe, Dr. Salam, I'll maybe start with you this time.
Yeah. In terms of data, it was mentioned before that I give you an example from the data we have from farmer registry. You know, Lebanon, we face since 2011 the Syrian displaced crisis. So we have a lot of projects supported to farmers in Lebanon, and we have a lot of international organization and national organization giving this support. So with data we have acquired, we have a module now. We will start it now on next January, that each farmer receive a support will be integrated in this module. In this issue, if we have, for example, one NGO give him a voucher of $300, the next one, another NGOs want to help or to support farmers in this issue. That's why we gonna tell that this farmer benefit from this project. So let's move for another one and so on. In terms of implementation, or in terms of application, we are here preventing the application of supports. We know, for example, with data analysis, if let's say we get a fund to support olive producers, so we can go to the list weight filter, and we have the olive producer in the whole country. In terms of analysis, it will be helpful for us, and we can divide it into different areas. For example, we have some area, they are not infected by some, if you want, some problems with, if you want, Xylella or whatever, for example, some infections, and we can move to this issue. So in terms of analysis, I think data is very important. It should give us an idea about the production, about the area we have, what are our new strategy, and in terms of implementation, it helps us to, if you want to benefit from any support we have, and to give it for the farmers that are decided to give it. But why? Because now we can support farmers, but in different way. So if we have a project for olive trees and the farmers have vegetables, we're gonna support him. So we are losing money, and we are not achieving the target of the project as has established before. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Salim. Dr. Emoto, what is your perspective in terms of the evolution of data? Any data needs that you feel you need but you don't have? And how do you see that being addressed?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think, when it comes to data, you have to invest a lot in cleaning up the data and making sure that the metadata that goes with it also is stored and reported accurately, because there is quite a lot of data out there, but there's also not good data that goes with it. So it's really important to really clean up these data and invest in people who can clean up the data. But once they are able to clean up this data, then they can start using it for um, projecting, for forecasting, and make sure that some of that information reaches the ground in terms of early warning, especially. So, in the biodiversity sector, I would say, we've invested quite a bit as the South African National Biodiversity Institute, but also as Sandparks, in terms of just cleaning up all of the data from researchers coming into our parks, from the monitoring programs that we have in our parks. So, information management is very, very important. So, yeah, I think going forward, it's important that we ensure that data that goes into the systems is going to be valuable in informing what's going on in the countries. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Muthu. I think it's very important to raise the point that we just don't need data, but good data. If you want to make good decisions, we need good data. Zita, coming back to you in terms of overview and like the evolution of the data ecosystem, what do you see are the key challenges and opportunities moving forward?
Thank you. Maybe I would like to raise 2 points. One, reiterating the bit previous message that if you are driving your car in a fog and you can't see what is ahead of you, you drive slowly, right? And this is the situation if you actually don't have data. So you need to slow down. You need to take precautionary measures. And if we would implement this, then there would be probably also much higher interest of generating data, because not having the data would mean something to your management options. So that first of my points. And the second one, I am looking at Becky here in the audience, because this is something we discussed just recently together, that we also have to see what kind of data we need. And there's a lot of focus nowadays on, for example, Earth observation-based data, data related to land cover, and not enough, in our view, not enough focus on the quality. So what is the soil quality? How is soil health? you still need to dig into the soil to find that out. So you really need to integrate different type of data, which also means investing in different kind of monitoring systems. And this is largely overlooked. I would also say it was better earlier in terms of there was more understanding that we actually need to look into the soil profile. We need to dig into the soil, and this understanding is somehow lost. So we really need to reconsider and go back to the roots if it comes to soil health. Thank you.
Thanks, Ita. Great. So, is there any final view, insight, intervention from the audience? Something that you would want to raise, given the topic we are discussing? Yes, there's one lady at the back.
Hi. So, have you guys worked
Please
on?
introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sarah. I'm a landscape architect from Atkins Realis. So, I was wondering if, I mean, I heard you were talking about Lebanon, data in Lebanon. But have you worked on anything here in Saudi Arabia? Have you collected any data in Saudi Arabia or in Riyadh, or is it all based only in Lebanon?
Sorry, the audio is not very
Please,
clear.
can you?
Have you collected any data in Saudi Arabia, or is it just in Lebanon?
No, it's only in Lebanon.
Okay, and is it an open source data?
No, for farmer registry, it's the property of the Ministry of Agriculture. But in case we have implementation project with donors or with international organization, we can share some data related to some areas. For example, list of farmers in terms of, for example, if they are working for vegetables. So we filter from this data what farmers are producing vegetables, and we can give them the list maybe to help them in their activities on the field.
So it's only based on farmers, not, for example, forest makers?
For forest, we have another project, and also we have for our colleague Hussein Nasrallah also is a minister advisor, and we have also data for aquaculture, for marine and aquaculture in land in the Lebanon and also in the sea. So we have several projects regarding data. For example, we finished the census for fishermen, how many boats, what are the capacity of their boat of production, and so on, and to implement new project. Because if you have, for example, today a donor and he asking you what you are going to do, you cannot tell him, okay, go to this area and this area. We give the donor or the international organization the list, and he is free to choose the area want to work on it, and also in close collaboration with the ministry. So in this issue, we can support them, because if you go, for example, on internet, and you put agriculture assessment or value chain assessment Lebanon, I can tell you, you will have thousands of reports from NGOs. And if you can compare it, you will see the same value chain, for example, for vegetables, are value chain analysis by USAID, EU, FAO, WFP, and so on. We are losing a lot of money to have what are the need assessment, if you want, analysis, and so on. So I think it's very important. We start from zero, but I think now we are now on 50 out of 20. So we are moving forward slowly. Also, it depends, because we need a lot of funds to
Dr.
continue
Salat.
what we are doing. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
I would suggest please take it bilaterally after this session as well, because there are good practices that can be shared and also applied in your context as well. So with that, perhaps I would start moving towards the conclusion of this session, which I feel was very insightful and rewarding and enriching. My key takeaway was that no matter what we do in data, data is not meant to be generated for the sake of generation. It is meant for something to be applied against. What is the use case? Where we start the data from is where the data collection starts, and data is not an end itself, but it's a means to an end. Um, I did hear earlier about the importance of SDGs. Baron was mentioning about it. Like SDGs have revolutionized the data ecosystem. We have much better data being collected as compared to what we used to have 15 years ago. He mentioned under SDG 15, 126 countries, and the Sendai related indicators, we have 163 countries. But that's not just about the number of countries reporting, but also the quality of data that we have. It's important to show the application of the data. One, to ensure we can ensure the visibility on the urgency of the matter, how much we are losing, how much of land is being degraded, how much of groundwater is being lost. The urgency is demonstrated with the right data we have. At the same time, turning that data into decision and ensuring that decision is the right one being taken is also very, very important. If we don't do that, we lose the importance of data collection and sustainability in the future. We also talked about investment in data and the returns to investment that data will give you back. And that brings us to the question, how do we approach data? Is data something that a private sector entity or even a UN entity or even an intergovernmental organization or a non-governmental organization? You mentioned so many data sources in Lebanon, for example. Are they all being accessed? Is data a public good? I think we haven't reached there yet. And that's a discussion we would want to have, that it's good that we have a lot of data, but if we don't have access to the data, we'll lose the meaning of the data availability. Data access is very important, and hence it is important that we, through the legal measures, regulatory measures, it's happening in the UN system, data is becoming a digital public good now, but we will not need to ensure that we also have the right regulatory measures in the countries so the access to data is being developed. The system that I showed in the beginning of the session, the DesInventar or the new data tracking system for loss and damage, will be an open source software and continue to be so. We have data from 113 countries as of now in that system. All of that data is available in the public domain and anybody can go and access it. So if you need more information on that, please feel free to contact us. For anything else, we are all here and around this pavilion as well to provide more information. Feel free to grab the panelists in case you need to get more information. And with that, I'm very happy to conclude this session. Thank you very much.